We often wonder what really decides a war. Is it the size of the armies, the number of tanks, the weight of bombs dropped from the sky? Or is it sometimes something smaller, more focused on mind, one will, moving inside all that machinery? It's the spring of 1944 in Berlin. In a gray office behind blackout curtains, German officers lean over a table covered in photographs, decoded messages, and reconnaissance reports. They are not trying to find a convoy to sink or a division to destroy. They are trying to find one man. The constraint is brutal and simple. They get one real chance to stop the Allies from breaking into Western Europe. They must place their armored reserves where the decisive blow will fall. If they guess wrong, if they send their panzers the wrong way, at the wrong time, there is no second attempt. No reset, no do. Over, somewhere across the channel, that blow is being prepared, and the man most likely to deliver it in their eyes is George. Patton, around the table, intelligence officers talk quietly, sliding photographs and reports back and forth. They have files on Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander. They have files on Montgomery, the brightest general who fought Rommel in North Africa. But their thickest file, the one they keep closest, belongs to a different American, Patton. Field Marshal Ger von Rundstedt, the senior German commander in Western Europe, receives any update on Patton as high-priority intelligence. He has fought the best the Allies can send against him. Patton is different. Patton terrifies him. The first solid contact with this American comes in November 1942. Operation Torch. It is the Allies' first major ground operation against Axis forces, landings along the North African coast. Patton commands the Western Task Force 50 American troops driving toward Morocco. German commanders watch from a distance, through reports, through the cold lens of reconnaissance aircraft and the chatter of radio intercepts. They expect the Americans to move the way their doctrine says they should, methodically, carefully, with overwhelming firepower and slow, cautious advances. But in the first 3 days, something goes wrong with that expectation. Patton's troops secure Casablanca and accept the French surrender with a speed that catches German observers completely off guard. He does not inch forward, he drives. In the Mediterranean theater, Field Marshal Albert Kessler, responsible for German forces in the region, takes a particular interest. He sends a request back through intelligence channels. Who is this man? What has he done before? How does he think? The answers that come back are troubling. Patton has spent his entire career studying German military tactics. Not in translation, but in the original language. He reads German military theory as it was written. He has walked French battlefields from the First World War, tracing the paths where German armies nearly broke through. He understands German operational thinking in a way that many of their own younger officers do not. This is not an enemy who fights blind against them. This is a man who has studied them. 3 months later, in February 1943, the Germans test the Americans in a way they have not yet experienced. Under Rommel's direction, German forces strike at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. The result is a disaster for the United States. Inexperienced American units break, lines shatter, panicked troops flee west in confusion. It becomes the worst defeat American forces suffer in the entire war. German commanders watch closely, not just for the victory, but to see what the enemy does next. Do the Americans retreat and dig in far to the rear? Do they sack their generals? Do they lose their nerve? The answer arrives in early March. George Patton takes command of course, same shattered American formation that has just collapsed at Kasserine. From the German side, reports start to change almost immediately. Within 2 weeks, the same soldiers who ran in panic are attacking again. Discipline reappears like someone has thrown a switch. Uniforms are corrected. Columns move with more order. Outposts that had folded under pressure now hold. Morale, which had seemed broken, is rebuilt in days, not months. German reconnaissance patrols report something they have not seen before from this enemy. American patrols probing their lines with a new aggression, testing flanks, feeling for weak points. Rommel notices. In his diary, he writes that American forces have suddenly become far more dangerous. The shift is too rapid to be explained by reinforcements or new equipment. The uniforms are the same. The guns are the same. The difference is command. Someone new is giving the orders. The next time the Germans feel Patton's presence, it is on a larger stage. July 1943, Sicily, the island is the stepping stone to mainland Italy, and the Allies plan a deliberate, balanced operation. On paper, the British Eighth Army under Montgomery has the main thrust. He will advance up the eastern coast toward Mzina. Patton's Seventh Army is assigned a protective role guard Monty's flank, secure the western half of the island, avoid risky adventures. Once again, Patton has other ideas. From the first days ashore, he drives his forces hard. American columns push across western Sicily at a pace that startles not only German observers, but Allied commanders as well. They cross miles of rough, winding roads and hostile towns in times that look wrong on a staff officer's map. In 39 days, fighting almost continuously, his army covers 200 miles to reach Mzina. Units that had expected to withdraw in good order ahead of the Allied advance suddenly find American spearheads in places they had not anticipated for another week. German formations trying to evacuate across the narrow strait of Mzina realize they are in a race they did not plan for. What was supposed to be an orderly pullback becomes a scramble. Units that counted on days to disengage and reach the ports discover they have hours. Convoys jam the roads, signals cross, some formations get out. Others are cut off or forced to abandon equipment to move faster. By the time Patton's forces reach Mzina, he is there before Montgomery, despite starting farther away and being, in theory, on a supporting axis. After the campaign, German officers write their after-action reports. There is professional respect in the language, but also alarm. One officer notes that Patton fights like a panzer commander, not like an American infantry general. He takes risks American doctrine does not allow. He exploits weaknesses before defenders can fully react. He focuses on speed, on momentum, on turning a flank before the enemy can even be certain where the main blow is falling. He thinks like a German. That is precisely what unsettles them. They built their doctrine on the idea that they understand mobile warfare best. Now in Sicily, they face an American who seems to operate by their own rules. Then, at the height of his success, something happens that has nothing to do with maps or maneuvers, and everything to do with Patton as a man. August 1943. He visits evacuation hospitals in Sicily, walking the crowded wards where wounded and exhausted soldiers lie on cots. In some beds are men suffering not from visible wounds, but from something invisible, bat fatigue, what the army calls battle exhaustion. To Patton, forged in an older understanding of courage and fear, they look like men who have abandoned their duty. Cowards in one ward, he confronts a soldier he believes has no physical wound. The anger flares. He slaps the man across the face. A week later, in another hospital, it happens again. Another soldier with shattered nerves, another confrontation. This time Patton draws his pistol, threatening to shoot. The incidents do not stay quiet. Word reaches Eisenhower. The Supreme Commander is furious. The story leaks to the press. Suddenly, the general who has just driven an army across Sicily in record time is at the center of a scandal. Newspapers run editorials calling him unfit for command. Congressmen demand he be sent home in disgrace. In Berlin, German intelligence officers monitor the controversy with intense interest. They have identified Patton as the most dangerous American commander they have yet faced. Now it seems the Americans might cripple him on their own. They pass translations of American newspapers up the chain. They brief senior commanders. This might be the end of their most aggressive enemy, General, but the end does not come. Eisenhower does not fire Patton. He reprimands him harshly. He removes him for the moment from active field command. But he keeps him in the game. For German analysts, this is a worrying signal. The Americans are not discarding Patton. They are putting him aside, out of sight, which means almost certainly they are saving him for something important. By early 1944, Patton is in England. He has no combat command. On the maps and in the order of battle, his name does not appear next to any of the major formations, obviously preparing for the coming invasion of Western Europe. But German intelligence teams in Berlin and Paris track his movements obsessively. They know he is there. They know he is visiting units, giving speeches, being photographed with soldiers and equipment. They know he is not doing nothing. So the question becomes a kind of quiet drumbeat in every briefing. If Patton is not leading any of the visible invasion armies, what is he doing? German analysts work through the possibilities and reach what seems to them the only logical conclusion. Whatever Georgexx Patton is commanding, that must be the main invasion force. The Americans would not waste their best general on a sideshow. What they do not know, what they cannot know, is that the formation Patton has been put in charge of, the 1st United States Army Group, does not exist in the way they think it does. On paper it is huge. On the airwaves, its headquarters chatters continuously. Its units send and receive radio traffic that fits a vast, growing army. In aerial reconnaissance photographs, tanks and vehicles sit in fields and marshalling areas. But up close, those tanks bend when the wind hits them. They are made of inflated rubber. The headquarters buildings are painted plywood, facades with no substance behind them. The 1st United States Army Group is a ghost. It exists in the signals and images that German intelligence collects. It exists in the expectations and fears of the men around that conference table in Berlin. It is the greatest deception operation of the war. And it works for one simple reason. The Germans believe that wherever Patton is, that is where the real blow will fall. The German High Command gradually locks on to a single conclusion. If Patton is in England, and if he is not leading any of the clearly identified invasion forces gathering opposite Normandy, then he must be in charge of something else. Something larger, something decisive. They give that something a name, 1st United States Army Group. On maps and in assessments, it grows into the main Allied battering ram. In reality, FUSAG is mostly ink, radio waves, and rubber. But in the minds of German planners, it is the spear pointed straight at the narrowest point of the channel, Pas-de-Calais. In situation rooms across France and Germany, the logic is repeated until it hardens into certainty. The Americans would not waste their best field commander on a secondary operation. Where Patton is, the main attack will come. They track fake traffic from phantom divisions. They label inflatable tanks in reconnaissance photos as armored brigades. They outline fictional corps on their maps. The conclusion shapes everything that comes next. They place their best reserves, their strongest armored formations, near Pas-de-Calais. They strengthen coastal defenses, there more guns, more bunkers, more minefields. They are waiting for Patton. 6 June 1944. Dawn breaks gray over the English Channel, far from Pas-de-Calais, 150 miles to the southwest. Allied landing craft plow toward the beaches of Normandy. On the German side, reports explode across the networks. Paratroopers have dropped inland. Naval gunfire pounds coastal batteries. Beaches with code names, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, soared erupt into chaos. The invasion Hitler has been expecting for years has arrived. But in German headquarters, from corps level up to Okel, a critical question hovers over every decision. Is this the real invasion? Or is this a feint something meant to draw their reserves south so that Patton with the real army can strike later at Pas-de-Calais? At his command post, Field Marshal von Rundstedt sees the danger immediately. If the Allies get off those beaches and expand the bridgehead, they will be impossible to dislodge. Only one thing can stop them in these first vulnerable days: a concentrated armored counterattack, launched quickly before the lodgment solidifies. Rundstedt wants to release the Panzer Reserve snow. He asks for permission to move them, but the decisive order never comes. In the FUR's headquarters, Hitler and his closest staff argue the landings at Normandy could be a diversion. Patton, their most dangerous enemy general, is not there. To them, that absence is as loud as any exploding shell. If they commit their armored reserves to Normandy now, and the real invasion hits Pasti, Allies later under Patton, the Reich will have nothing left to parry it. So they wait. Waves of Allied infantry and armor fight their way off the beaches. Days pass. German divisions in Normandy bleed themselves white trying to hold the line. And still, for 6 critical weeks, powerful German armored formations units that could have crashed into the beachhead in its fragile early days, it near Pas-de-Calais, frozen. They wait for an attack that never comes. They wait for Patton. In the hedgerows of Normandy, American and British units grind forward slowly at terrible cost. They fight without the man German intelligence is convinced must be leading the decisive blow. The absence continues to fuel their doubts. Surely this cannot be the main effort. Surely Patton is still out there, waiting to lead the real storm. That belief becomes its own kind of weapon. It keeps German reserves off the battlefield until the Allies have too much strength ashore to be pushed back. By the time the High Command finally admits to itself that Normandy is not a feint, the chance to crush the bridgehead is gone. The Deception Faust unit's fake radio nets rubber tanksonly works because of a single very real belief. The Germans cannot accept the idea that the Americans would leave George Patton out of the most important battle of the war. 1 August 1, the deception phase is over. Patton receives what he has been waiting for, a real field command. The Third Army, he enters the fighting in Normandy not as a ghost, but as a hammer. On the German side, the name that has haunted their intelligence summaries for months now appears in real operational reports. Patton is here. Every fear they have carefully catalogued about him is about to be validated. In the first 2 weeks of August, Third Army moves like something uncoiling from a clenched fist. Where other armies have taken months to fight through fields and hedgerows, Patton's formations surge forward in great arcs. They break out of the Normandy cage and flow into open country. One thrust goes west into Brittany, snapping up ports and territory at a tempo that disorients German defenders. Then, with scarcely a pause, his main effort swings east toward Paris and beyond. From the German viewpoint, the effect is disorienting and then catastrophic. Units that have dug in along defensive lines for weeks suddenly discover American spearheads behind them. Supply routes they believed secure are cut or threatened. Headquarters that thought they were well behind the front line find American columns closing in, guns rumbling in the distance, bridges in danger. Orders begin to conflict. Front line commanders call for guidance and get multiple answers or none. The German command structure in western France begins to unravel. Lines on the map that once showed a stable front become meaningless. The front is wherever Patton's armored spearheads decide it is today. Field Marshal Unter von Kluge, who has replaced von Rundstedt as the senior German commander in the West, sends report after report to Berlin, each more anxious than the last. The American Third Army, he writes in different words, is everywhere. Every time German forces try to form a new defensive line to establish some kind of coherent resistance, Patton's units are already past it, probing, turning flanks, threatening encirclement. The situation, Kluge warns, is out of control. By mid-August, Patton sees an opening that is bigger than any one road or one town. German armies retreating from Normandy are funneling through a narrow corridor near the town of Falaise. On a map, it looks like a throat. If the Allies can close it, they won't just win. A battle lethe will destroy a large part of the German army in France in a single blow. Patton pushes north toward Falaise. To the north, Canadian and Polish forces drive south. The jaws begin to close. Inside the shrinking pocket, German units feel the noose tightening. Roads clog with vehicles. Columns bunch up under constant air attack. Orders become impossible to execute. Radio nets are overwhelmed. Artillery batteries lose contact with supported infantry. Officers cannot find their companies in the chaos. Some units try to hold positions to keep escape routes open. Others, seeing the trap closing, simply bolt east, abandoning vehicles and heavy equipment to escape on foot. Soldiers throw away packs and weapons to move faster. Staff officers burn documents and try to blend into retreating columns. The destruction is on a scale that German officers cannot easily put into words. Estimates after the battle are blunt. German losses in the Falaise pocket exceed 50, 0 captured, and perhaps 10, 0 killed. The numbers for equipment are even more devastating. Most of the remaining tanks, artillery pieces, and transport vehicles of the German army in France are lost in or around the pocket. For the formations that survive, it is not just a defeat, it is dismemberment. Later, officers who escaped describe Falaise with a comparison that shocks Allied interrogators. It was worse than Stalingrad. At Stalingrad, they say, there was time to prepare, to dig, to organize some kind of formal resistance before the end. At Falaise, Patton and his allies give them no time at all. The pocket collapses under constant pressure, speed, and the relentless drive of mobile forces that simply do not stop long enough for the Germans to catch their breath. Months later, when German generals sit in captivity and Allied intelligence officers question them, the same names keep coming up in their assessments of Allied command. They are asked, which enemy generals did you respect? Which did you fear? The answers are remarkably consistent. They describe Montgomery as predictable, methodical, careful. He will not attack without a detailed plan and strong artillery preparation. That makes him easier to fight. You can read his intentions. You can anticipate his axis of advance. You can prepare. They describe Bradley as competent but cautious. He does not take great risks. He prefers solid, limited objectives to wild, sweeping maneuvers. German commanders feel they can usually foresee his movements and align their defenses accordingly. Then they speak of Patton. Here the tone changes. German generals reach for different words: unpredictable, aggressive, dangerous. Von Rundstedt will later say Patton is the Allied general they fear the most. General Fritz Berlin, who commands the Panzerlehr Division, tells his interrogators that Patton is the only Allied commander with the instincts of a German panzer leader. They respect Rommel among their own because he is bold and unconventional, willing to seize opportunity and ignore the book when the situation demands it. In Patton, they see those same traits on the other side. He does not fight by the Allied manual. He makes decisions faster than his opponents can react. He understands, as they do, that war at the operational level is not primarily about slow, careful planning and sheer tonnage of firepower, but about speed, shock, and the ruthless exploitation of any weakness that appears. Von Rundstedt's summary is simple and stark. Patton, he says, is the most dangerous man they face. December 1944. Snow lies in the forests of the Ardennes, muffling the sound of engines and boots. On Allied maps, this sector is marked as quiet, a rest area, thinly held by tired American units who are supposed to be recovering from months of fighting. Then before dawn, the quiet shatters. German artillery erupts along a broad front. Armored columns roll out of the mist and trees, punching into American positions that never expected a major offensive here. The last great German gamble of the war has begun. Within days, American units are in retreat. On one key road junction, Bastogne, 101st Airborne Division finds itself surrounded. Cut off, encircled in winter, with German armor closing in from all sides. The situation is desperate. At Verdun, Allied commanders gather for an emergency conference. Around the table, the mood is grim but controlled. They lay out maps, trace penetration lines, estimate enemy strength. Eisenhower asks the question that hangs over everything: how quickly can we counterattack? Most of the generals answer within the framework they have always lived in. They talk about weeks. Moving an army is complicated. You must plan routes, coordinate fuel and ammunition, realign supply dumps, reestablish communications. Turning a major force 90 degrees to face a new threat isn't something you do in days. It's something you do carefully or not at all. Then Patton speaks. 48 hours, he says. He can attack in 2 days with 3 divisions. The other generals in the room look at him with a mix of disbelief and irritation. On its face, it sounds like grandstanding. You cannot turn an entire army on a different axis and launch a coordinated offensive in 48 hours. The logistics alone, fuel, rations, artillery ammunition, road control take weeks to reorganize, but Patton is not guessing. He is revealing. Long before the first German shells landed in the Ardennes, his intelligence officer Oskar Koch had studied the patterns. Enemy regrouping, traffic intercepted on German roads, the strange quiet on a front where you might expect small probing attacks, but instead see almost nothing. Where others dismissed the idea of a major German offensive as unlikely, Germany, they thought, no longer had the strength. Koch reached a different conclusion. The enemy is not finished yet. He predicts an attack through the Ardennes. Patton listens. He does not wait for proof in blood. Quietly, long before the December snows erupt in flame, he prepares contingency plans to pivot north. He drafts orders that can be activated with a single call. So when Eisenhower asks how fast he can move, Patton already knows. After the meeting, he makes that one call. Signals flash out to 3rd Army's Corps and Division headquarters. Within hours, columns begin to swing north. Quartermasters redirect fuel convoys to new routes. Traffic control officers establish priority lanes on icy roads. Staff officers wake sleeping commanders and hand them new objectives. More than 250 Zero men with tens of thousands of vehicles start to pivot through winter condition, over frozen ground along narrow, treacherous routes toward the sound of the guns in the Ardennes. Not in weeks, in 48 hours. On the German side, the shock is profound. Their plan relies on time. They expect at least several weeks before the Allies can redeploy major forces to counterattack. Their intelligence picture still carries an old underestimation. Yes, Patton is fast, but no one is that fast. They are wrong. While German tank columns drive west, expecting a window of freedom before the inevitable response, Patton's Third Army is already bearing down on their southern flank. By 26 December, American spearheads break through to Bastogne. The siege lifts. The city that was supposed to Falaise defenders were offered surrender and answered Nazis relieved. German momentum stalls. What was intended to be an offensive that splits the Allied armies, captures key ports, and perhaps forces a negotiated peace is stopped, and then slowly rolled back. After the war, in interrogations, German generals are asked what went wrong in the Ardennes. They give many tactical and logistical reasons. Fuel shortages, weather, air power once the skies clear, but a number of them return to the same simple point. They had not expected Patton to respond so fast. They thought they had more time, from North Africa to Sicily, from Normandy to the Falaise pocket, and finally in the Ardennes, the pattern is the same. From the first day they encounter him to the last day of the war, they consistently underestimate how quickly Georgexx Patton can move. And every time they pay for it. So why, in the end, do so many German generals fear Patton more than any other Allied commander? It is not because he commands the biggest army, or because he has the most guns, or because his name sits highest on the Allied organization chart. It is because he thinks like them. German doctrine at its core emphasizes speed, aggression, and the relentless exploitation of enemy weakness. Blitzkrieg's lightning war that shattered Poland, crushed France, and drove deep into the Soviet Union is built on those principles. Concentrate force, punch through, drive hard into the enemy rear. Never give them time to stabilize a new line. German commanders grow up inside this philosophy. They understand it instinctively, and then, on the other side of the battlefield, they meet an American who fights the same way. Patton has spent decades studying German tactics and strategy. He reads their manuals, he studies their campaigns. He walks their old battlefields and imagines their decisions. When he finally commands real armies in real war, he puts that study into practice. He does what they would do if they had his resources. When he sees an opening, he does not hesitate. He drives through it harder and faster than the rulebooks say is wise. He launches attacks when doctrine suggests he should be regrouping. He advances when his own logistics officers warn that supply lines are stretched thin. He takes risks that make his superiors nervous and his enemies deeply uneasy. German commanders can usually predict what most Allied generals will do. They know the British and American training systems. They understand the Allied preference for heavy artillery preparation, for overwhelming firepower, for methodical advances. That predictability to them is a weakness they can work with. They can plan for Montgomery's careful bill, Duff's for Bradley's cautious, stepwise approach. They can anchor defenses, plot likely axes of advance, and prepare ambushes where they expect the blow to fall. But with Patton, the pattern breaks. He does not always pause where he is supposed to pause. He does not always dig in where doctrine says to consolidate. He attacks when others would regroup. He changes direction faster than their own planning cycles can turn. When German staffs ask themselves, what will Patton do next? They do not have a clean answer. They only know three things. It will be fast, it will be violent, and it will cost them. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, the man who commands German forces on D-Day and who has faced the best Allied generals, puts it in stark terms after the war. Patton, he says, is the supreme master of mobile warfare, a brilliant practitioner of offensive tactics. And the Allied general, the Germans fear the most. From the beaches of North Africa to the hills of Sicily, from the fields of Normandy to the snowbound forests of the Ardennes, Georgexx Patton earns that fear one campaign at a time, one impossible timetable at a time, one risk that pays off before his enemies can believe he is really taking it. For a German officer studying a map in Berlin or Paris in 1940, For the question is not just where the Allied armies are. It is where Patton is, because if he is on your front, every comfortable assumption about how long you have, how far you can retreat, how fast you can regroup suddenly becomes suspect. You are no longer fighting the Allies you thought you understood. You are fighting someone who learned your own language of war, and then spoke it back to you faster and louder than you expected. If you have stayed with this story to the end, consider this. What part of the German fear of Patton feels most decisive to you? Deception at Pas-de-Calais that kept panzer divisions away from Normandy, the whirlwind breakout that closed the Falaise pocket, or the 40, a tower pivot that saved Bastogne? Do you think it was Patton's personal aggression and speed, or the German belief about him, their expectations and misreads, that had the greater impact on how the war in the West unfolded? If you want more stories that look at war through the eyes of both sides' decisions, the misjudgments, and the single individuals who bend entire campaigns, tell me which commander, which battle, or which deception you want to explore next, like the video, if this changed how you see Patton and the German High Command. Subscribe if you want to follow more of these deep dives into the minds and movements that actually decided the war.